You are listening to Shannon Weber's discussion around bridging an empathy gap, stamping your passport with an empathy adventure, and learning how empathy adventures can guide us into expanding our capacity for connection and creating change. Hello and welcome. You're listening to the Embody podcast, a show about remembering and embodying your true nature, inner wisdom, embodied healing, and self-love. My name is Candice Wu, and I'm a holistic healing facilitator, intuitive coach, and artist sharing my personal journey of vulnerability, offering meditations and guided healing support, and having co-creative conversations with healers and wellness practitioners from all over the world. You can find the full episode on Shannon's story on how she created her love notes, as well as our discussions around vulnerability and intimacy, noticing missed connections, reimagining our script for life, how to lead instead of save people, and how boundaries create connection in other spaces at candicewu.com/Shannon Weber. And right now, I will leave you in the loving hands and heart of Shannon Weber.
When I was a college student, I was working in Switzerland one summer as part of a work-study exchange. And on the weekends, when we had time off and we'd gotten paid, we would go on adventures. I loved collecting stamps in my passport at the time. And I would go out of my way sometimes to go through a country or try to see if I could make my way through even a small country, if even just have the stamp in my passport. It was such a freeing experience because regardless of how I experienced that country or the weekend for that period of time, if I liked the food, if the hostel was comfortable or not, if the places I'd wanted to visit were open or not, I still had the stamp in my passport. So about 10 years ago, when I was at a transformative time in my adult life, I challenged myself again with having these various adventures with the only goal of having the adventure and getting the metaphorical stamp in my passport. Not being attached to the outcome of what would happen freed me to try new things, to experience the world and people and adventures in different ways than I might have otherwise. And at the end of the experience, if I ultimately decided it wasn't for me, or if it was particularly challenging in some way, I could say to myself, and I often talked about this with my best friend, well, I have the stamp in my passport. So I bring this to you as a practice now when we think about empathy and how we might grow our empathy muscle. So we know that 10% of our empathetic response is an innate response, which means that the rest of it can be learned or it can be built, it can be developed. And so this practice of this empathy adventure passport, which I introduce in my book, Show Up Hard, and this resource that I'm going to reference, the Empathy Adventure Passport, is available for free for download at showaphard.com. This is a practice that can be really useful for people who are wanting to experience more empathy in their life, and for people who have perhaps a higher innate response to being empathetic. The Empathy Adventure Passport can be useful in helping us to understand ourselves on our empathy adventures so that we can either more quickly access empathy or so that we can be more expansive in whom we feel empathy for. You know, one of the things I've learned about myself is that I have a story I tell myself that I'm a highly empathetic person, but there's also truth that I have biases and assumptions, and these stories or stereotypes and narratives can be getting in the way of me being empathetic for some people. So it's true, I'm highly empathetic in some situations and some times, but I still like to challenge myself with these empathy adventure experiences to be more expansive in my ability to access empathy for a variety of people. So I want to just walk through the Empathy Adventure Passport and talk about the different steps. And I think it's so valuable, by the way, to print this out and actually write it, because there's something valuable in the process of noticing, of slowing down to notice, but also because writing helps us to integrate things. And so for those of us who are on a quest to more deeply and expansively experience empathy, this practice of writing about it can be really, really helpful in helping develop that muscle or skill. So, as part of the empathy adventure passport, we define what the adventure is. And sometimes these adventures are happening to us. So, it might be a crisis or a situation that comes up at work or in our community or in our family, but they also might be adventures that we seek out. So, if I notice an edge to myself, then I might task myself with finding an adventure, which helps me to tap in to that edge and to explore whether or not I can find a new edge. So, what is the adventure? And then we reflect on what's the internal narrative. So, what's that story I tell myself about this adventure? That can be both who I am in the story or what I'm expecting about the other person or the scenario. But being able to identify our internal narrative is super helpful because it can help us one acknowledge it and give it space so it can sit there, but then it gives opportunity for there to be space for something else to be true. We can also write down our biases and assumptions. What are we taking from our own worldview into this experience, which might impact the adventure? There's a place then to write about what did you notice about your body? And I'm so keen on this aspect of noticing our body in these various experiences because our body always gives us clues as to what's going on. And so the more that we can learn to tap in to the clues that our body gives us, then the quicker and sometimes more easily we can navigate or traverse these challenging and or expansive experiences. And then there's an opportunity to write what's the takeaway. So what did you learn about yourself, or what's the summary of this empathy adventure? And it may be, hey, that thing is not for me, and that's you got your stamp in your passport. But it may be that we changed our mind, that we fell in love, that we came away with a different worldview or a new perspective. And that's the beauty of going on these empathy adventures, is that we ourselves might be changed. And then finally, how did I return to myself? Because while we go on these adventures to see the world through someone else's eyes and to experience the world in a new way, and this is part of how we create change in the world, we need to let ourselves know at the onset that we will come back to ourselves. So we may come back changed. And that's the beauty of writing about it, is that we can then integrate it and it can become part of who we are and how we show up in the world next time. And that can be part of the more tangible aspect of the passport stamp from that experience, so to speak. But I think it's also helpful for these riskier or more challenging empathy adventures if we let ourselves know at the onset, I'm going to return back. It provides a sense of safety and stability that we can come back to that core of who we are and give space to process it or to integrate it. So I wish you all the best in having magical and expansive and wondrous empathy adventures. I hope the Empathy Adventures Passport is helpful to you in navigating these experiences. And I'd be so thrilled to hear from you about how the Empathy Adventures Passports serves you in becoming more expansive with your empathy.
Thank you so much for listening in today to the discussion around empathy adventures. I hope to see you next time on the Embody podcast. You can check out other experientials, podcast guests, as well as healing topics and self-love topics at candicewu.com/podcast. See you next time.